If you've been a part of the Madness community for a while, then you already know about Madness itself. But what about the media that was inspired from it that you may not know about? Today, we will be going into more than just inspired media itself, word by word, and we'll give you decent history about all you need to know for the topic of this video. Please note the definitions we will go over today, however. Skip at this timestamp if you're watching for a second time or you want to figure it out yourself. It's up to you.
Unlike Madness, Bunnykill for the most part is an episodic series where each episode is centered on one continuous storyline, whereas the only exceptions being Bunnykill 3 and 5 as they are split into volumes and parts respectively. Each episode takes place within a different setting, the first taking place in a tech forest, the second in urban housing, the third in a very mechanical sci-fi universe landing us directly on the moon, and the fourth in feudal Japan, starting in a forest as a nice nod back to Bunnykill 1. The series ends back in an urban environment, but this time reimagined in the modern day, while not straying too far from some of the light sci-fi elements as seen in the previous entries. While the character designs share the same attire and mannerisms, Snowball always sporting his signature blue shirt, Smoke his charcoal fur, and Dust his red mohawk, the alliances of each character change from iteration to iteration, namely Smoke and Dust's. Did you know Snowball had a purple shirt in Bunnykill 1? The series starts very simple, using flat colors and mostly brushwork. The improvement with Bunnykill 2 is drastic, now including shadows and a cinematic art style reminiscent of Alien Hominid. Coming into Bunnykill 3, we get stylish perspective shots as well as a lot of gradients, and a super crappy gun sprite that Matis replaces in the second volume. Bunnykill 4 introduces the GTA font for most text and returns to mostly flat shading. It's also the only episode with an animated credit sequence, using sprites from the episode itself. Bunnykill 4 also uses tinted smoke particles for Blood Mist. Very neat. Bunnykill 5 is our biggest change in style, switching between 3D outside scenes and 2D inside scenes. All sprites now use line color matching their fills, and moving objects are composed entirely out of gradients. Matis' approach to gore is also interesting, having each bullet chip away at the rabbit slowly, mixed with a new gradient blood mist and splatters, everything comes together in a very visually appealing way. The animation in Bunnykill employs a lot of classic cartoon tricks, such as teleportation when off strain, smooth movements, and a heavy use of visual effects on anything that can have them. Additionally, unlike Madness, legs are actively present, which allowed Morris more varied choreography. Visually, Bunnykill makes high use of gradients on objects and weapons, which neatly contrast with the flat-shaded rabbits and effects. If you wish for a longer examination of the Bunnykill franchise, we'd recommend a video by Two Left Thumbs, which goes over the full history of the franchise.
Ninjas, 2003 to 2006. Ninjas is perhaps one of the earliest entries in this video, with the first episode predating both Thing and Bunnykill coming out only a few months after Madness 3. The Ninja cartoons are simpler than Madness as they use way fewer parts to animate, as a total of 3 or 4 if you count their faces. They rely much more on tweens and practically have no plot, instead mostly focusing on the action. The Ninjas themselves use various weapons like scythes, shurikens, lightsabers, and even battleships. Each episode is usually shorter than Madness and Bunnykill, with the events happening in them being mainly focused on the choreography and action, mainly skipping out on big story scenes. The series is primarily episodic, with episode 6.5 being pirates themed, along with the remake of episode 3 being sci-fi themed. The rest of the episodes take place in either a blank room or a generic environment. You can draw a lot of comparisons to the construction scenes from The Matrix and Madness Interactive's Experiment Mode, however it is likely because they share one similarity: an empty room. The author of Ninjas is usually Angry Mouse 13, although there seems to be a discrepancy in some entries, since it seems that a user called Exmaster was also involved with some of the creations. However, the amount of fan tributes are super small and most of them aren't very significant. Thing, 2005 to 2013. Thing first came out in 2005, only preceding Madness by a few years. However, while it may seem to have a striking similarity to the general style of Madness, Disease Productions has confirmed that Madness was far from the inspiration for Thing Thing. In an interview Happy Days did with Diseased, he stated that the game was inspired by Vector Man for the Sega Genesis and the DOS game Abuse, released in 1996. The Thing series follows the protagonist, Project 154, escaping from a research building owned by System School, the mega corporation and main antagonist of all the Thing games. 154 goes on a rampage to escape his captivity, and he soon breaks out. The following games show 154's journey to break free of System School, but as shown in Thing 4, Project 154 was doomed to fail in the end and gets gunned down after being overwhelmed by enemies. Also, note this, you cannot win in this section. You were meant to die here. There's a 5th game planned, even having fully finished concepts for bosses and other enemies, but that died out due to Diseased feeling that it was not doable, along with the Flash market collapsing and Thing 5 being generated. The art of Thing. The art of the Thing series starts out incredibly simplistic, with backgrounds being entirely grayscale in the first game, at least until the end, when it reveals you are actually in the middle of a bright green forest. The character design is similarly simplistic, with the heads, hands, and the body of the character being round circles, and the feet being half circles. Oh, and in this game, their outlines this time around, the sprites for the characters are much bigger, and the lines around them are much thinner. The general body shapes haven't changed much since last time. The cosmetics and accessories that the characters wear have more variety, with some actually being colored this time around, but their general shapes are very simplistic and geometric. The same can be said with the backgrounds and other art in this game. Thing 3. For the first time in the main series, the characters have hands. I know, shocking, right? They don't have circles for hands. Who knew? In other games, the circles would have only changed if you're holding a weapon, for example. They also have shoes instead of just half circles for feet, and the art and geometry are generally improved. Yeah, I don't think it would be very comfortable to Thing 4. The backgrounds of this game are much more varied than its predecessors, using textures, shading, and highlights to make it pop, and of course by having much more gore than the previous entries. By far, one of the best looking Thing games in the main series, but probably not the best play. We group these games together because they are basically the same game, only with minor tweaks between the two. These two games take a less gritty appearance background-wise, seemingly due to how fast you have to play the game and subtle details becoming a blurry mess with the fast movement you need to effectively use in the game. There isn't much else to say besides improved cosmetics and different guns. Portals and a Penguin, which some may know from the Afixa upload instead of the Crinkles upload on Newgrounds, is an AMV for a techno song with Portal samples made by Afixa, who then commissioned Crinkles to make the AMV itself. The artwork was supposedly done by Monster Cat Design, and the animation features Madness-like animation because Crinkles was mainly animating Madness at the time and might have found it easier to do it in this frame-by-frame style. The various stolen gun sounds used in Madness are present here because of this, since there's no point in just throwing out all the sound effects you have on hand. The animation follows Afixa, the penguin, fighting through turrets and mechanical arms for a pair of golden headphones. But before we skip this section, while we were making this video, Happy Days was able to ask Crinkles if he still had the files for the animation, and he did. It was in Swift format, but thanks to persistence of our inner team, now a true sprite sheet of Portals and a Penguin exists. Link in the description. Have fun.
Some of you may know of Madness Death Wish, as it was a popular series of animation/games. But did you know that it eventually branched off into its own thing? Final Death Wish is a sequel to Death Wish 2, but the characters are uniquely designed, appearing more human-like instead. Aside from the villain of the game looking kind of like the psychopaths from the first two Death Wish games, the story has barely anything to do with them. It should also be noted that the character similar to the psychopaths appears in several other of Arcuni's games. There isn't really much more to say about it.
Riddle School is a point-and-click adventure game, released on Newgrounds all the way back in 2006. It was originally supposed to be a Madness game, as confirmed by the developer and the early assets made for the game. Originally, the game was supposed to start with the protagonist jumping up and shooting the teacher, according to Jonachrome. Also, if you're wondering, yes, School Madness does exist. Aside from that, the game is not really all that Madness-like, but if you want to learn more about it, you can check this video by Two Left Thumbs. He goes into far more detail than we did here. Hallie has been animating since late 2017. Hallie has refused to comment on projects prior to Descent, mainly out of shame. As for Descent, the first episode of which, released in 2020, was a classic Madness fan animation, set in Soviet Russia aesthetically, funnily enough being inspired by Half-Life 2's beta. Hallie's reasons for quitting Descent mainly consist of dislike for the poor research she performed while making Descent, and the audience of bottom feeders it attracted.
I had a re-upload of one of the videos, where it was just a video but in shitty quality. The title was just something about how women are bad, and the comments were just sketching jokes.
After ending Descent, Hallie moved on to the title of this section, Impurity, a medieval low-magic universe inspired by FromSoft's Souls-likes and the indie game Mamadora. Impurity focuses on sword fighting, occasionally spruced up with rather easily deflected magic and crossbow bolts. Impurity's art and sprite style follows the simple mantra of don't overcomplicate things, with the backgrounds being plain, letting the animation on top take focus, with the characters of Impurity being the closest you will get to actual humans in any Madness-inspired animation, with the exception of Mandatory Madness, which can hardly be considered human. The film takes place in the city of Lorraine, where the hunter, Sybil, is tasked with slaying Priestess Elenia of the Church of the Moon. Sybil fights her way through the city guard, only to fall to Priestess Elenia, but not before wounding her, causing the moon to go mad. Along with the main story, Hallie has given us some wonderful insider information, like... There is, however, some actual lore as well.
Wasn't expecting this here, huh? Or maybe you did. In any case, the entirety of the Rayman franchise would be way too long to cover in this video, but it is very, very notable that it practically pioneered the disembodied limb design that Madness and a couple of other entries on the list have, and for that we applaud. The style of the Rayman games is very cartoony and slapstick compared to the gritty violence of Madness, emphasizing bright colors and a generally cheery environment and bright atmosphere with very few rare exceptions. We owe the grandfather of this style of animation a salute.
This game was actually made by one of our members, solidp to be precise. While the game is still in early development, everything from the character structure, guns and the animations themselves is Madness inspired. It serves as a marking to the madness that resides within all of us.
From the oldest entries to the latest, it is fair to say that Madness has inspired a great ton of creators to make their own projects over the years. And in return, those projects have inspired other creators to do their own thing. We should all continue the tradition and pay tribute to the greats of old, and make the greats of new with their guidance. You can draw your own conclusions on originality yourself that is far beyond our pay grade. Anyways, if you liked what you saw here, give whatever rating you feel the video deserves. We'll see you when we see you.